Hello, it's Molly again. Alana is cooking right over there. Alana, you want to say hi? Hi, Alana. So, this episode is about something called planned obsolescence, which is when something is supposed to get out of date or broken on purpose by the manufacturer so that people have to buy a new one. This idea was come up with, I think, in the 1930s or 40s. I would have to look that up to be totally sure. And it was invented by a man named Raymond Lowe, who also designed the pack design on Lucky Strike cigarettes, if you've ever seen those. And they still use that pack design today. And there was this thing they came out with called the cold spot refrigerator. And the first thing they did with planned obsolescence was that they would use the same interior mechanisms on the cold spot refrigerator, but give it a new, outer shell so that it looked different. And they would come out with a different one every year. So that if you wanted to, keep up with the Joneses, then you had to buy a new cold spot refrigerator every year. Oh, and this is a coffee episode, by the way. We are not drinking. Not drinking alcohol. We're drinking coffee. So, Raymond Lowe is some kind of fucking genius. He's like, you know what? We should do this with cars, too. So, they started having, all the same interior, mechanisms, but putting a new body on the car every year. So that people who were rich were like, oh, well, I got to get the new model of that car because it looks different than the one I bought last year. And if you're going to keep up with the Joneses, you got to have the newest stuff. Which was a pretty genius idea. And it made a lot of money for a lot of corporations. And then the idea developed. And it became even more extreme, which is now planned obsolescence means that the thing is supposed to break in a couple years. So you have to buy a new one, even if you don't care about how it looks. So, yeah, most appliances and cars and pretty much any machinery that you buy, unless you buy old machinery, will fail in a couple years. Like, say you buy a blender. In 2 or 3 years, that blender will just stop working because of planned obsolescence. And they're like, oh, now you have to buy a new blender. So the more money you spend on a blender, the more it will last. So poor people have to keep buying the same thing over and over again, whereas rich people can buy the most expensive version and it'll break after 5 or 10 years instead of after 2 or 3 years. So poor people end up spending more on appliances than rich people. But since they don't have as much money at the time, they're going to buy the cheapest model, which breaks in 2 to 3 years. Or an even shorter period of time than that. But if you get, for instance, I had an old mixer, for baking. And it was from, the 60s or something. It lasted for years. Years and years this blender works. And it still works. But unfortunately, it's in my ex-boyfriend's mother's garage. So I don't have it. But it still works. Whereas if you buy a mixer today, unless you buy a really expensive one, it's going to break in 2 years. And there is no way to fix it because they make it on purpose so you can't fix it yourself. Same thing with cars. I used to have a Saturn. The transmission went bad on it. You couldn't go on the highway anymore. They did that on purpose, so you have to buy a new car. Raymond Lowe was a genius. Capitalist genius, probably had no morals. He was a completely immoral person. So anyway, that's Raymond Lowe for you. Possibly one of the smartest capitalists of all time. I personally am against capitalism, so I kind of hate him. Anyway, end of transmission. I would not sleep with him.